You know, if you attend enough Quackaholics Anonymous meetings, inevitably some topic is going to get brought up about the program as it was originally intended. Uh, Usually, I noticed during my years of going to Quackaholics Anonymous that they would always inevitably pop up when someone had tragically passed away from drinking or a drug overdose or committed suicide, or if it was in one of these big book studies where they have to go over everything line by line by line, you know, in their holy big book of bullshit, and they have to actually act like every little sentence in there, every period, every comma, or everything else has some vital bit of crucial information, like the fucking Da Vinci Code, you know, or something like that. As a matter of fact, I don't know how true the story is, but I know that there was a meeting I was in one time, and this one guy that was involved in some kind of state level garbage or some kind of something to do with some weird committee somewhere, was talking about how there was a comma missing in the big book, and that it was unanimously voted that they couldn't put the comma in the big book because it might alter the meaning of the sentence and it might cost somebody their life. And at the time that I heard that, probably a made-up story, to be honest, I looked around the room and everybody was, you know, emphatically nodding along and acting like, you know, this was some big life-changing thing that they had decided to keep their text intact as the way it is. It's actually kind of further proof of the cultish nature of something, that you're so afraid to do something with basic, simple grammar that you're afraid someone might die because of that. They do love that term die, don't they? They throw that around all the time. But in fact, I remember at the time I first actually sat down one weekend and read through the whole entire book. And I'm not no English scholar, you know, I'm not no some kind of authority on the English language or anything like that. The only reason I probably noticed this is because I love to read. I've always loved to read books. But I noticed that a lot of the big book, I mean, he's talking about fucking comma. I mean, a lot of the big book is grammatically incorrect. It's poorly written. The sentence structures and some of it is a little bit, it's not really, well, it's no great piece of profound writing. Let's put it that way. As a matter of fact, I don't know if anybody else that's ever involved in the fellowship ever come across it, but you'll go to these big book meetings where they have these studies, where they have this dictionary that's supposedly from the 1930s, and they go over it line by line, and they'll say things like the word obsession in the 1930s meant possession by an evil spirit. I mean, it's really just that freaking stupid. But it's really funny. I mean, I tried explaining this to some of the cult members even at the time. I was like, you know, there are books written in the 1930s that people still read today, and they don't need some weird dictionary, made-up dictionary, a mumbo-jumbo to try to figure out what it means. I mean, like, you know, William Faulkner, you know, Ernest Hemingway, John Steinbeck, just to name a few writers from back then. I've read those guys, by the way, not because I'm some literary authority. I was kind of one of these kids that just, you know, the library was probably the daycare center when I was growing up. That's where you got dropped off after school if you couldn't go home or something like that. So I, you know, for boredom, I just like to read. But what I was going to get to in the topic of this video is that inevitably in these little meetings and inevitably in these little groups, you know, the topic comes up that we're not doing the program correctly. We're not doing it the way it was intended. We're not following the footsteps of the almighty Bill W. or some shit like that. To give an example of this, I remember, and there again, it's so silly to look back on it now, but I remember there was a guy that was bouncing around the rooms, kind of like I was bouncing around the rooms, like so many hundreds of them. But I remember this guy in particular because he ended up committing suicide. And this idiot, right after he had passed away, had to talk up in a meeting about, I'm tired of coming to these meetings and I'm tired of watching people die. Well, you know, that's kind of a good indicator that maybe your freaking program is not all that it's cracked up to be if you're tired of watching people die all the time. I mean, if the thing was so wonderful, it seemed like it would be right the opposite. You wouldn't see people dying all the time. But anyway, he started going on and on and on about how we don't bully people enough on their four steps the way they used to do. And he started going on and on and on about how we let new people talk. And he started going on and on about how they let drug addicts come to the meetings and, you know, all this silly stuff. But anyway, he concluded with he knew exactly why this guy committed suicide. And, I mean, I'm dead serious. I wished I was making this garbage up. But he was sitting there and he said the reason he died was it was because he was in belligerent denial of God. It was belligerent denial of God that killed him. And I was thinking, well, no, probably the reason he ended up dying was because he had fucking nutcases like you that he turned to for help when he really needed help with his drinking problem, and it probably needed help on how to cope with life. But the idea of this video actually popped up when I was browsing online, and it couldn't have come at a better time. Someone in some pro-AA group, somebody shared this, had mentioned this post where this guy was talking about this very same thing I'm saying. And he was saying there's a tide of unrest and apathy rising in the program of recovery from alcoholism. Singleness of purpose has become contention as having a sponsor and working the steps of recovery. This is that same old worn-out excuse I always got in AA for why the thing didn't work for certain people. It never was because the program itself could be faulty. It was always because you weren't working the steps properly, because you weren't doing the right inventory. You forgot to talk about in the inventory how you took a candy bar from the refrigerator when you were a little kid, and that's why you ended up drinking again. It was because you didn't have the right sponsor. It was because you didn't, read the big book properly. Those first 164 pages. God forbid you may have read a story from the back of the book, and that's what really fucked you up. It seems like ever seems to occur to them in their fragile little minds that maybe the reason why it's falling apart, or maybe this so-called rise of contention, there they go with the over-dramatic melodrama. What it really boils down to is outside of people being forced into the AA program against their will by the court systems. Without them, AA in itself would die. It's not a rising contention. It's just the fact that the time has changed a lot since the 1930s. I mean, it's changed quite a lot. If you think about all the technological accomplishments and all the medical advances and all the scientific advances we've had since the 1930s, we've come a very long way. I'm not saying we know all the answers or anything like that, but we've come far along the way that we shouldn't be throwing a religious cult at people as the primary mode of treatment. The reason why it's supposedly not successful, or has never really been successful, I'm going to talk a little bit about that later, is because it doesn't work. It's not because people are not being fanatically religious and closed-minded enough. Here's another little excerpt where they go on and they say, non-alcoholics speak of their rights in meetings, yet they fail to acknowledge that not being members of AA, they have no rights. I find that very interesting. Isn't it weird how when you're a newcomer, they tell you the only requirement for membership is it's a desire to stop drinking, and the realm of the spirit, it's all inclusive, never exclusive. And, anybody who thinks they have a problem with alcohol is welcome. But then, after you've been around the fellowship for a little while, you start hearing them in these meetings, and they'll talk about how the drug addicts are ruining the fellowship. And they'll talk about how, non-alcoholic people are ruining the fellowship. But wait a minute, don't they tell every newcomer that nobody can tell you you're an alcoholic, that's something you kind of have to decide for yourself? So if that's something you have to decide for yourself, and nobody can call you an alcoholic, you have to make the determination, then why do they always sit around in these meetings and always talk about all these non-alcoholic people that's ruining it? I mean, where do they get that from exactly? Oh, yeah, that's right. This is a religious cult. It doesn't make any sense. It's not supposed to make any sense. For a second, I was actually trying to treat this insanity with logic, which it can't be done. Anyway, the guy who, wherever he posted this, it said, I've always believed in and based my recovery on the program developed by the first 100 members and written down in our big book. Oh, that's really profound. There was no first 100 magical members that stayed sober now and forever until the end of time at the beginning of the so-called big book being written and everything. As a matter of fact, I think I don't know how many people in AA actually even know the historical facts behind all of this, because there was no first 100. There wasn't even really that many to compose 100, but out of that group, almost most of them were gone by the time of the second edition of the Big Book print. And I'll put some links down here in the video description about it. But yeah, there was no, this magical group of people that all found this secret to life through Bill W.'s weird, twisted, blind, idiot God, and all decided that they were, from here on after, they were going to be sober forever and ever. Now, a lot of those people left because they got screwed over. Believe it or not, some of those people were promised money for including their stories in the back of the book. Some of them were also promised other various things. And of course, Bill conveniently managed to steal all the rights and the permissions and everything, and managed to make quite a lot of money off the big book. And you've had, I've had a lot of people say to me, well, Bill wasn't a saint. Bill was just a human being. Well, when a guy is going around telling everybody that they've got to conform to his horseshit religious cult or they're going to sign their own death warrant, then yeah, I kind of expect him to live up to a certain standard there, other than just being a downright phony. I mean, I guess only a cult person could actually truly defend someone being 100% phony and trying to claim that there's some value in what the guy's doing here. But anyway, yeah, I'll post a link on that. There was no first 100, and even the program itself wasn't conceived of by Bill and Bob. It was ripped off from a group of people called the Oxford Group, and they're still around to this day, I might add. They're just going under another name. Now, there is on morerevealed.com. There's a book you can read online. Now, it's written from a decidedly Christian perspective. I'm not a Christian, I'm a pagan, but that's neither here nor there. It's written from a Christian perspective by a lady that was involved in the early Oxford Group, and she talks about what it was really like behind the scenes. She knew the original Frank Buckman. She knew all about the religious cult aspect of it, and really and truly, it's really funny when you think about it. The Oxford Group was just a big money-making organization. It was no different than any other kind of it kind of come from a thing. I could do a whole nother video about it. There was a early 1900s, late 1800s thing called New Thought movement. It involved people, various frauds like that Emmett Fox that wrote Summer on the Mountain, other things like that. That's where all this crap come from. It's not like Bill got struck by lightning, and all of a sudden, whatever God it was he supposedly believed in. I always call it the AA God, because it's incompatible. AA is actually incompatible with non-religious people, but it's also incompatible with religious people. As a matter of fact, I want to kind of do a video on that at a future time. How a religious person shouldn't really feel comfortable or should obviously have problems with the weird doctrine of AA. I mean, it's direct blasphemy to any religious tenet. It's direct blasphemy to any, and it's also an insult to people who are non-believers, atheists and skeptics, or spiritualists or anything else. The whole entire thing is not this broad, inclusive highway that it claims to be, that includes everyone who wants to join up on it. It's completely the opposite of that. In fact, I think I am going to do a video on that. But anyway, so this guy goes on to say, as we grow further apart from those first 100, those who contributed to the writing of our big book, we allow their teachings to fade into antiquity. Well, that's a crock of shit. I mean, their so-called teachings is blabbered and repeated about in every single meeting. I mean, we're not allowed any room to think in AA. We're not allowed to have any kind of thoughts whatsoever outside of the cult doctrine, so that's obviously a bullshit point in of itself. I mean, teachings fading into antiquity. I mean, every fucking meeting you sit into, you have to hear about what a wonderful guy Bill freaking W was, or how wonderful Dr. Asshole Bob was, or those kinds of people. And, what is it? We have a whole fucking book we had to read out of in one group I was in called As Bill Sees It. Like Bill's freaking opinion is so much more valuable than mine. I mean, a phony con artist that made millions off this organization, his opinion is so much more valuable than mine. And then we got Dr. Bob over there, if you're an atheist or an agnostic, I feel sorry for you. Well, I'm just so sure that the rest of the human race needs to fold up into a fucking corner and die because you, asshole abusive father that you were, who was a total scum that never got his medical license back. I mean, your opinion really should matter to me that much. But to talk about fading into antiquity, I mean, AA has never allowed anything to fade into antiquity. It's the same old religious cult that it was when it first started. It hasn't progressed. It hasn't changed. It hasn't adopted to the changing times. It hasn't accepted science. It hasn't accepted studies. It refuses scientific inquiry. So I don't even know what the fuck they're talking about there, other than another attempt of the cult member to try to be a little bit more dramatic than they. They're all addicted to drama, I swear. Okay, so where did I leave off here? We mock our own history as if that history was all a lie. Where does that happen? Because every meeting I've ever sat into, that's all they talk about is how the wonderful history of AA must have been inspired by whatever AA God it is that those people preach about. So again, this is just more rambling and bullshit blabbering in an attempt to sound a little bit more dramatic for their phony 12-step cult. AA as originally written was here for me. Well, as it was originally written, it's never changed. It's never evolved. It's never even gone under a revision outside of hacking people's stories out of the big book. And a lot of the times that had to do with people that got drunk again and left the fellowship. As a matter of fact, why don't you Google Tom Powers, who was one of Bill's right-hand guys. I mean, even that AA apologist, I mean, her stuff is really cringeworthy. Her name is Susan Cheever. I think I'm saying her name right. But even she had to write about when Bill was writing the 12 at 12. I mean, this guy named Tom Powers was like his right hand. And he said that they had to literally drag him into the office every day. And he was sitting at his typewriter wailing and sobbing and crying. And they could barely even get a book out of him. And Powers left him in disgust. Yeah, I really want to... That guy really sounds spiritual, by the way, to me. The guy who hates his own organization. He created so much that he has to cry at the thought of writing another book. Think about that for a minute. Okay, we may end up with something called AA, but it will be Addictions Anonymous. Oh, this is the same old overdramatic bullshit I've heard in every meeting. We allow people who do drugs to come to our meetings. We allow people who smoke pot to come to our meetings. They don't ever tell you about how many old-timers there are in there. And I really think this is why AA hates drug addicts, because I personally knew a lot of AA gurus that used to talk about how God had removed the desire for them to drink. Okay, they would talk about how, because they were living in God's will, they didn't have to drink anymore. Now, they didn't want anybody to really know that they were out there smoking pot and snorting coke and, eating prescription pain pills and Xanaxes and Valiums that they bought off the street. They didn't really want people to know about that. I mean, and the funny thing about it was I had one guy actually justify this one time to me. I mean, this is a guy that I knew for a fact he would smoke crack and he would smoke pot and he would pop Valiums before he went to a meeting to speak about his sobriety, I might add. And, and he said to me off the record outside one time, well, if newcomers realized I was doing all those things, it would hurt the message. And see, I have to carry the message to others. Oh, okay, excuse me for believing you're supposed to actually practice what you preach. I thought you were, smoking crack and smoking pot and eating pills because it made you high. I didn't realize you were doing it, but hide the newcomer from the awful truth. Oh my God, this is so ridiculous. Okay. Whose fault is it that our recovery rate, they write, is no longer even 10%? Whose fault is it that the mere mention of singleness of purpose brings forth anger and resentment in our meetings? Well, that's a lie. For one thing, they've never had no stellar success rate. For another thing, they've never had no stellar figures. I mean, otherwise they wouldn't have objected to scientific study. I could point them to the George Valiant study where he set out to prove they were effective, and his conclusive results after several years of studying them proved it was really terrible. Plus, I'm going to say something else right here on this. I'm going to call bullshit on this writer because I've been to a million meetings where they've kicked people out for not saying they were alcoholics, for saying they were addicts. Okay, I've been to meetings where someone would actually introduce themselves as an addict, and some asshole old-timer would have to say, this is a closed meeting, I don't want people like that in here, and they'd throw the dude out. So I've never actually been to a meeting where singleness of purpose was a problem. Okay, outside of some open speaker meeting somewhere or something like that, I've never been to a closed meeting where singleness of purpose was met with contention and anger. They got this juvenile, junior high school, well, it was middle school. It had just become middle school when I was coming up. But before that, it was junior high. I'm old enough to remember junior high. But anyway, they got this junior high melodrama school mentality about them. It's really highly freaking annoying. And whose fault is it? Well, it's your own fucking fault because your program is useless. Your program is a religious dogmatic cult that is never adopted to the changing times. It refuses to be studied by science and has never even taken a look at the ever-changing world around it. Isn't it funny that they say in their AA Big Book, that science may one day figure out a cure for this problem, but we have not. Yet they never actually want to entertain anything about the major advancements that science has made in the field of addiction. So in other words, you're going to say, well, one day science will figure it out, but we cannot. What you're really saying is science is never going to figure it out because we've already found our weird, phony religious cult solution, and we're not going to change from that or back up from that one bit. Okay, each and every one of us, the person concludes, who believes what's written in our big book, yet sits mute in the face of its destruction. No, nobody's destroying your holy fucking big book, okay? The court system makes sure that you have a steady supply of customers, as does the treatment center monopoly, that rakes in billions a year to keep people going into your phony fucking cult. Nobody's trying to take your big book away. The only thing that's going to eventually take the big book away is the number of growing alternatives and the growing body of science and medicine out there that realizes that you're treating people with an outdated solution that never even was that great to begin with and didn't help anyone. It really kills me how many people that I've encountered that are critical of AA, who are highly critical of AA, just like I am, will try to dodge the bullet every time by trying to say something like, well, no, there's no doubt it's helped a lot of people. No, it has not helped a lot of people. I mean, I was listening to a new YouTube channel I subscribed to earlier this afternoon from this guy. He's called American Jesus. I kind of like the title anyway, but I was watching a couple of his new videos. In fact, I'll post a link to his channel in my description too. But he had some thing about, what evidence do you need that AA doesn't work? Well, I mean, the overwhelming evidence is everywhere in front of you all the time. Anyway, I saw this little note, and it got me to thinking about all the meetings I sat in where, somebody had to come up with, we're not working the program as it was intended by the first 100, which, and I used to just cringe inwardly when I would hear that because, I've seen people in AA that would, like I said, I've seen people come to an AA meeting and say, they were a heroin addict, and everybody would have this immediate group conscience, they'd all put their hands up, like they were really brave for doing that, and then they'd throw the person out. So, I mean, there's nobody deviating away from your holy big book. I mean, you can't even read a topic in a meeting that's not conference-approved crap literature. So, this is the same old tired excuse I had to hear for over a decade when I was in the cult. The only reason people die is because they're not working it correctly. The only reason that we have more deaths now than we did back then is because we have more non-alcoholics in our midst. They've got an excuse for everything and every fucking thing except for the fact that they've got a phony fellowship religion that doesn't work. It's the same thing that I used to see in treatment when I've been in treatment a couple of times, and I used to see them say, most of you aren't going to make it in here. Most of you most of you are going to get drunk again. Most of you are going to be using the minute you step outside that door. And I used to wonder, well, if the failure rates are that abysmal, how is this supposed to convince me that your program is so wonderful? Okay, that's about all for now. I think I've got 2 other topics I want to touch on this week. Hopefully, I'll get an opportunity to do them. But anyway, until next time.